Right now, as you read this, you are the only kind of human on Earth, not the strongest kind, not the oldest kind, not the kind that was here longest, just the only kind still here. And 60,000 years ago, that was not the case. 60,000 years ago, this planet had at least 4 different kinds of humans living on it simultaneously. Different bodies, different brains, different ways of surviving, different languages, or something like languages, different relationships with fire, with tools, with each other. 4 different experiments in what it means to be human, running at the same time. Today, there is one. The question everyone asks is why? The answer is not what most people expect. Stay with me. Let's start with the species that makes everything else look young. Homo erectus appeared on Earth approximately 2 million years ago. To understand what that number means, consider this. Every city humans have ever built, every war ever fought, every book ever written, every language ever spoken, all of it fits inside the last few thousand years. Homo erectus was alive for 2 million. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably like ours. Long legs built for covering ground, arms shorter than earlier primates, a frame designed for walking, running, traveling. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa, which means they figured out how to survive in environments their biology had never encountered. Their stone tools barely changed for hundreds of thousands of years. To modernize, that looks like a failure of imagination. It was not. It was a sign that what they made worked so well, there was no pressure to improve it. 2 million years. Ice ages came and went. Entire ecosystems rose and collapsed. Homo erectus adapted through all of it, and then they didn't. Their final populations ended up isolated on islands in what is now Indonesia, cut off from other groups. No new territory. The forests they depended on began shrinking. The animals they hunted became harder to find. A population that cannot move and cannot grow, cannot recover from a string of bad seasons. Their last fossils date to around 110,000 years ago. 2 million years, and then gone. Now let's talk about the species that almost nobody gives enough credit to. Neanderthals survived in Europe and Western Asia for more than 300,000 years. 300,000 years of Ice Age conditions that would be completely incompatible with modern human life without technology, shelter, and supply chains. Their bodies were built for the cold in ways ours simply are not. Wide chests, dense bones, heavy musculature, large noses that warmed freezing air before it reached their lungs. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They hunted large, dangerous animals at close range. We know this because their skeletons show the same injury patterns as modern rodeo riders. Fractured ribs, shoulder injuries, the evidence of a life spent in direct physical contact with things that could kill them. They made sophisticated tools. They controlled fire. They buried their dead. There is growing evidence of symbolic behavior, pigment use, personal ornament, care for the elderly and injured. These were not primitive brutes. They were people. And then Homo sapiens arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago. For a few thousand years, both species shared the same territory. They encountered each other. They competed for some of the same resources. DNA evidence confirms they also had children together. Between 1 and 4% of the DNA in most people alive today outside sub-Saharan Africa came from Neanderthals. But the Neanderthal population was already thin before we arrived. Small groups, low genetic diversity, fragmented across a changing landscape. When the climate shifted again, as it kept doing, their already small populations had less room to recover. By 40,000 years ago, they were gone. Not killed in a battle, not driven off a cliff, simply squeezed out by competition, by climate, by the mathematics of small populations in a world that kept changing faster than they could adapt. Now, the strangest chapter. In 2008, a team of researchers in Siberia pulled a bone fragment from a cave in the Altai Mountains, a finger bone so small it could sit in your palm. When they extracted DNA from it, what came back didn't match anything in the database. Not Neanderthal, not Homo sapiens, something else entirely. A previously unknown branch of the human family that had left almost no physical trace in the fossil record. We call them Denisovans. Since that discovery, the physical remains recovered total a handful of teeth, a jaw fragment found on the Tibetan plateau, and not much else. We have almost no idea what they look like, but their genetic shadow is enormous. Denisovan ancestry shows up across parts of Asia and Oceania. Some Melanesian populations carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetans inherited a specific Denisovan gene, one that allows their bodies to function at extreme altitude where most people's physiology would begin to break down. A species we can barely find left behind genes that are still saving lives today. But as a living population, Denisovans were gone by around 30,000 years ago. Their range was probably vast. Their numbers were probably thin, and thin populations in a world that keeps shifting rarely survive long enough to recover. And then there is the most astonishing chapter of all. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers found the remains of a human species that should not have been able to exist. 1 meter tall, brain roughly the size of a grapefruit, living alongside Komodo dragons and dwarf elephants in an island ecosystem that had been shaping evolution in its own isolated direction for hundreds of thousands of years. Homo floresiensis, the hobbit. Islands do strange things to evolution. Cut a population off long enough and the rules change. Large animals can shrink, small ones can grow. Homo floresiensis may be the most extreme example of island evolution in the entire human story. Their fossils span from roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago. Stone tools suggest they may have persisted until around 50,000 years ago, right around the time Homo sapiens was spreading through the region. On a small island, a small population does not need a catastrophe to disappear. It needs only a run of bad luck, a new competitor, a few bad seasons, and a numbers game it cannot win. So why are we here and they are not? The easy answer is intelligence. We were smarter. That answer falls apart immediately. Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans adapted to environments that would kill most modern humans without equipment. Homo erectus solved survival problems for 2 million years. Homo floresiensis built tools and hunted in one of the most challenging island ecosystems on Earth. Intelligence was not what separated us. What may have actually made the difference is something harder to measure and harder to see in the fossil record. We built networks, not just groups. Networks, information, tools, and techniques moved between Homo sapiens communities across distances and timeframes that don't appear to have been matched by other species. When one group solved a problem, that solution could travel. When one region became uninhabitable, knowledge of other regions already existed somewhere in the network. Our social connections were redundant in a way that made our species resilient. Even when individual groups were devastated, the knowledge didn't die with the people who held it. It had already moved. When the climate shifted, as it kept doing, Homo sapiens had the flexibility to reorganize because we were not locked to any single place or any single strategy. But even that is only part of the answer. Luck played a role. Geography played a role. Being in the right place with enough numbers at the right moment played a role. The other human species were not inferior. They were not failed experiments. They were their own kinds of humans, each with ways of surviving the world that worked for hundreds of thousands of years. They just ran out of margin. The margin between surviving and not surviving is smaller than most people imagine. One bad century can do it. One climate shift at the wrong moment. One new competitor arriving when your numbers are already low. Homo sapiens were not destined to be the last ones standing. We just happened to be. And maybe the most important thing that knowledge gives us is not pride, but humility. For most of human history, we were one branch of a much larger family. That family is gone now. We are what is left. And that is exactly what we are covering next week. What the other human species left behind in us that is still running in your